We do have probably the least transparent legislature in the country. And that's something that independent groups that look at legislatures all around the 50 states have said about Massachusetts for a long time.
Boots on the ground work so hard to get change, and there's a huge amount of public interest for that change and support for it, and then it goes nowhere.
This is going to happen only if people demand it. Legislators don't want to buck the will of the leaders and don't really want to get on the wrong side by being too vocal about what's going on.
There have been a lot of concerns about Massachusetts state legislature that have led to a ballot question requiring an audit.
We kind of lost track of how does the institution, the legislature itself, actually work.
I will stand for you. Could you stand for me? Everybody deserves to be free.
John Hecht is on the steering committee of the Coalition to Reform Our Legislature, a bipartisan organization working to make the Massachusetts legislature more transparent, accountable, and effective, and to empower individual legislators to represent the will of the people. He served as state representative for Watertown and Cambridge from 2009 to 2021. And we've got a saying, John, over here, nothing about us without us. And we believe in that wholeheartedly. And so that includes everybody that we choose to bring into our conversations. And so it's only people like yourself with such hands-on, real-life experience. There have been a lot of concerns about Massachusetts state legislature that have led to a ballot question requiring an audit. Could you outline some of those concerns?
Yeah, well, I think it goes right back to what you started off with. I mean, I think there's a lot of frustration around the state and a lot of concern that there's stuff going on in the legislature that people don't understand. We do have probably the least transparent legislature in the country. And that's something that, independent groups that look at legislatures all around the 50 states have said about Massachusetts for a long time. I think that has fueled this sense that, we need to find ways to open things up, not only to understand what's going on, but also to make the legislature a place where regular people can really follow what's going on and can engage and participate, and through their legislators participate and make changes. I think that's where the question one, which was to allow the auditor to look more closely at how the legislature operates, as the auditor does with other branches of government, where that came from. And 72% of the people who voted on that question back in November last year said, yes, let's let the auditor do that.
It's incredible to me. Quick question. I want to dive a little bit deeper into question one, but quick question around the history of this. Can you give us a little historical context of, has the Commonwealth, which is named the Commonwealth because it was intentionally supposed to be of the people, did our state legislature move over years more into this lack of transparency? How did we get to where we are now, where even, as you've said, independent groups and bodies that look at this say we are one of the least transparent legislatures?
Yeah, it's a great question, Andrea. And I think back in the sort of 50s and 60s and 70s, as people know, there was a lot of pressure to make our political system more truly democratic, make sure that everybody had the right to vote. We had a lot of laws around the country, including, unfortunately, in Massachusetts, that made it hard for certain people from certain racial groups, certain socioeconomic groups, made it hard for them to vote. And, the civil rights movement and pressure from the federal government and from the courts, fortunately, opened up, at least in terms of voting rights. We haven't gotten all the way there. There's more we still need to do on that front. And that well. A lot of felony disenfranchisement laws around the country, and including in Massachusetts. But we made progress on voting rights, and at the same time we made progress on dealing with gerrymandering. That practice of shaping the legislative districts in ways that made it harder for some groups to get true representation than other groups. And again, through a lot of hard work by people at the grassroots, people who demanded change, things that happened in the courts, things that happened in the federal government, we made some progress on that front too, so that our districts are now, equal in size, and we're attentive to making sure that, different interests and different groups in our Commonwealth do actually have representatives in the legislature. Still more work to be done on that front too, for sure. We're making progress, but I think what happened in Massachusetts is somewhere along the way in there, and we should hire a good historian to figure it out. We kind of lost track of, well, how does the institution, the legislature itself, actually work? So we make sure people have broad voting rights. We make sure that representation in districts is more fair. But then when we send these representatives to the State House, how do they actually do their jobs? I know that there are some other states that actually made some changes in their constitutions or in their laws to make sure that those representatives could really be effective representatives. And in Massachusetts, if anything, we've kind of gone the other direction. We've allowed a small number of legislative leaders to really control things to a degree where it's really hard for average legislators, or I shouldn't say average. I mean, it's hard for most legislators to really play, a significant part in the lawmaking process.
We have a legislature, which, as we have done a lot of policy work around the country over the last decade or so, helping other formerly incarcerated women who are working on these policy issues and legislation. But one thing that I found was really interesting that I did not know, most of the state legislatures in other places, they're not paid. And our state legislators are. And how do you think that, and it was a little bit shocking because of the very limited amount of passage of bills that have come out recently from the legislature. So why is that? Why is it that I understand states' rights. I understand, the right for states to make their own laws. But gosh, I mean, our legislators are paid here in Massachusetts, and some more than others. Can you talk a little bit about that from your experience of being a representative?
Right. Well, yeah, you're right. I mean, legislatures do vary a lot around the country. Massachusetts is considered a full-time legislature, so we're in session pretty much all year round, and legislators are paid a pretty good salary. It's hard for everybody in Massachusetts these days, given the price of housing and so on and so forth. But we actually, back in the 90s, we adopted a constitutional amendment in Massachusetts that set legislators' pay, what we call the base pay. That's the amount that they all equally get, and also tied it to median household income around the state, so that as median income rose around the state, that the legislators' pay would rise as well. And that now is about $82,000 a year that every legislator gets paid as their base pay. In fact, as you were just saying, we have another source of income for legislators. It's usually called stipends, legislative stipends, that some legislators get and some legislators don't. And what determines whether you get it is whether you are appointed to a leadership position or a committee chair position. And that decision is made, that appointment is made by the leaders of the Senate and the House. So they have a lot of control over legislators' total pay, because that additional amount of pay can be quite significant.
Are you saying that that decision is only made by leadership?
It's entirely made by leadership. Yeah, the
entirely.
President appoints all of the other leadership positions in the Senate, as well as all the committee chair positions. The minority leader in the Senate appoints a few people as well, members of the minority party, but almost all of the significant positions are held by the majority party, naturally. So it's the Senate president in the Senate who makes all those appointments. And likewise, on the House side, it's the House Speaker. that number of stipends, that number of positions that come with that extra pay has really grown a lot in Massachusetts over the last 30 years. And I do think that that's become a big factor in the ability of the leadership to control what goes on in the legislature, because the reality is that a significant number of the legislators are getting a large chunk of their pay from the appointments that their legislative leaders make. So it's created a culture
A conflict.
It's created a culture of follow the leader, because people don't want to lose that pay, don't want to lose the opportunity
Sure.
to advance to ever more well-paid positions. And again, it's just important to point out this is very different from any other state around the country. There are other states that have full-time legislatures, like Massachusetts, probably 15 or so other large states with industrial economies, large populations. But in those states, they don't have this kind of a system where so much of the pay of legislators is actually controlled by the legislative leaders. So that's one of the factors, I think, in why the legislature is unresponsive, and why it's hard to kind of make heads or tails out of what's going on, because legislators don't want to buck the will of the leaders, and don't really want to sort of get on the wrong side by being too vocal about what's going on.
Well, let's dig back now into the current status regarding the implementation of question 1, which is to audit the legislature. Can you first help us? We're just everyday people. We don't know a lot of the language. I certainly don't. It's a learning curve for us as we work on policy and legislation. But what does it mean to audit the legislature? What is that asking for? And what is question 1? Is this a law? Is this a bill, a proposal? Is it a ballot initiative? What is it?
Yeah, it's a law. So in Massachusetts, we allow the people to directly make law. Doesn't happen much. Most law is passed by the legislature itself, but there are instances where, if people feel the legislature is not being responsive, can bring what's called an initiative petition for a law, and they have to get a lot of signatures. They have to put it before the legislature and let the legislature at least take a crack at whether it wants to adopt it or not. If the legislature doesn't adopt it, though, there's a way that they can put that directly before the people on the ballot. And the audit question was question 1. It was the first of the ballot questions that was on the ballot in 2024. If that's approved by a majority of the voters in that election, as I said, it was 72% who voted yes on question 1, then that becomes a law. So that is now on the books in Massachusetts, a law that says that the auditor is authorized to audit the legislature. But as I think you really put your finger on it. What does that mean exactly, to audit the legislature?
Why hasn't it happened? Well,
that's where the fight is still going on. Is the legislature is claiming that even though this is now the law, it's claiming that there are constitutional reasons having to do with the balance of powers and other things that they're talking about that make it inappropriate for the auditor to audit certain things that are going on in the legislature. So they've raised these objections. There are a lot of negotiations going on. There may be some lawsuits. This may end up before the Supreme Judicial Court. I think the legislature is, they're still resisting and trying to find every justification that they can, and to prevent the auditor from digging into what's going on.
Let's talk a little bit about that so people can understand the separation of powers argument that's coming out of the legislature. The auditor is an elected position, yes?
Yes.
And they fall under which separation of powers? The executive branch, clearly not the legislative branch. Where do they fall in all of this that gives them the authority to audit the legislature?
Well, they're the authority is coming from this law that the
From the
people pass.
the people have spoken.
Exactly. In
Okay.
terms of law, the legislature is claiming that there's constitutional reasons, and of course the Constitution is higher than the law,
Yes.
for why they should at least be able to limit the extent of that audit, because as the legislative branch, they shouldn't be subject to scrutiny by another part of government. The auditor is generally considered to be sort of part of the executive branch, though it's a little bit complicated in Massachusetts because the governor obviously is the executive branch. We also have a directly elected attorney general. We have a directly elected auditor. We have a directly elected secretary of state. Where they fit exactly is a little bit hard to say, but the bottom line is that the legislature thinks that it, as the legislative branch, should be able to kind of control its own affairs.
They're elected, though, by the very people who 70+% said they want this.
Absolutely. And I think, continuing to, stonewall, continuing to delay, continuing to throw up, objections is not, it's not being responsive to the people.
Let's talk a little bit about the coalition to reform our legislature. Tell us what that coalition is all about. The title of it somewhat speaks for itself, but help us understand, how did it come about and what organizations are part of that?
Yeah, so, this comes out of the same sense of frustration with our legislature and with its lack of transparency, its lack of, openness to hearing from the people and being responsive to issues that the people are raising, the slowness of the process, the small number of bills that they pass. You mentioned that. I was in the legislature for 12 years, and I worked on a lot of things while I was there. Education, transportation, the environment, a whole host of different things. But I became increasingly frustrated just at how difficult it was to get things done, and how difficult it was to get my colleagues to really take on tough issues when the leadership didn't want to do it, or who became, I think, kind of unwilling to speak up, even though they knew that their constituents had particular needs, or wanted to see particular pieces of legislation taken up, but the leadership wasn't doing it. And I began to feel that, maybe I would able to be more effective working outside the legislature, trying to, address those kinds of, problems with the legislature itself, and make it possible for groups like yours and others to, really have their voices heard more effectively. I joined with some other former legislators, with some people who used to work, at the State Ethics Commission, some people who used to work at Common Cause, some folks who worked in other parts of the state government. And, we decided we would see if we could bring some pressure to bear from outside to try to change the way the legislature operates. And that's the way the coalition to reform our legislature, came about. And it's people from across the political spectrum, people who, just want to see the legislature become, more democratic, more transparent, more responsive. And we started out doing sort of basic education with folks about what's going on. And now we've kind of developed some particular reforms that we think would be helpful. And we're trying to push those, again, mainly with pressure from the outside.
Let's talk a little bit about that. What are the priorities of the coalition? What are these reforms that you're really working to raise the public awareness about?
We have two reforms that we're particularly focused on that we think would, open up the legislature and, make it a more, responsive institution. The one that I'm particularly focused on, you actually touched on a little while ago, is this issue of legislative pay, which, has really, I think, contributed a lot to the lack of autonomy that legislators have, has, unfortunately become a tool of control and has made it hard for legislators to really actively and independently represent their districts. And what we're trying to do is really cut back on that whole system of stipends that allow the leadership to control legislators' pay. Instead, say, listen, we don't mind that you make a decent salary. What legislators do is important work. In fact, we want you to do it even better. But we're going to say, you're not going to get this extra pay, unless you operate in a more open, democratic, understandable way to the public. So we're trying to basically say pay for performance. You'll get the pay if you particularly handle the bills in a way that makes it possible for groups like yours to come in and really have their voices heard, and then to see what the response is.
When you say that, we have done countless hearings and weighed in as experts on the issues of incarceration and different criminal law issues and so forth. We recently were told that after those hearings, where you go before the Judiciary Committee or one of the other committees, what happens after that? Does the committee reconvene itself? Are there any rules around that? Do they just hear what we have to say and then they just leave it at that? What happens? What is the real purpose of these hearings outside of really pressing on the issues that we need to find change? But what happens after those?
Yeah, that's really a great question. That's one of the things that we're really focused on is, the hearings, they've become kind of a spectacle in the sense, that, there's a lot of people who come because they're deeply concerned about these issues. It's their one chance to really be heard. Advocates do everything they can to turn out lots of people to really tell their story and share their concerns. What happens on the committee side is you just see the legislators just kind of sitting there listening. If they show up, oftentimes the legislators don't even come.
Very often not asking follow-up questions.
Yeah, they don't ask questions. And then the reality is that's kind of it, and that's a big problem. I mean, the bills get those hearings, and then oftentimes months go by, sometimes, a year, or, can be years and years where you have, each session, these bills are refiled, you have another hearing, but there's no real sense of, well, what happened? What did people think? Why aren't the bills moving? And the reason is because the committees actually never meet to discuss those bills, and they're never required to go before the public again and say, having heard all this testimony, having done additional research, here's what we think about the bill. Instead, they just send it off to what's called a study.
Very familiar with that.
I'm afraid you probably are. A lot of groups are. And, this, again, is very different from other legislatures. In other legislatures, and this was true in Massachusetts, until about 30 years ago, after the hearing, the committee then meets again in public to discuss what they heard, and they consider whether they want to recommend the bill to the full House or Senate for consideration, if they want to amend it, and they take votes right there in the public eye on what they want to do with the bill. Here, there's no meeting of the committee after the hearing. That was something that always just, I found very, very frustrating. Legislators could go to the chair of the committee and say, here's what I think, or here's what I'm thinking, or I hope you'll do this, do that. But there was no obligation to actually have another public meeting at which the public could see where their legislators stood on these bills. We just sort of let the chairs and then the people above them in the House and Senate kind of take over from that point, and everything they're doing is behind closed doors, and they don't have to give an explanation ultimately for why they never take the bill up.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that we're trying to do with our reforms on the pay is say, if you want to get paid as a committee chair, And even if you want to get paid as, the speaker or the majority leader or whatever, you got to have every bill has to not just have a hearing, but then have what they do in every other legislature, which is have what they call a markup session, where all the legislators on the committee have to say what they think about the bill. And then they have a public vote on the bill. And all of that is in the public eye.
Yeah, that's been very, very frustrating for us. We just have no real clue unless, we have incredible leaders in this space, Mallory Honora, for instance, and all of the folks at Building Up People Not Prisons that support our work on these issues. But it's very, very frustrating that you have to work really, really hard at what you're proposing and the drafts and the conversations about it, and then organizing people to come and testify, as you've alluded to. And then if we don't work 10 times as hard to develop some sort of relationship after these hearings with the legislature, we're in the dark. We have no idea what decisions have been made. Or there have been past years where we felt, we may have been thrown under the bus, like we were the battering chip on some things, some decisions that were made on other bills. We believe, like everybody, that what we're proposing is just what should happen. It's just what should happen, particularly in the criminal law system, to address many things that need to be changed. But how would people get involved, Jonathan, with your coalition? Is it open to people who may hear this interview with you and say, wow, I really want to figure out how to be a part of rules reform? Like, how do I join the coalition?
Well, we want everybody who's interested in this to speak out, speak out directly to their legislators to begin with, and just say that this is, not an acceptable, way to run a democratic legislature. They can also, get behind the specific reforms that we're proposing. We're actually going to hold a people's hearing on our bills on June 17th, because we've found with our own, proposals that they're being blocked. We actually filed our reforms as bills at the beginning of this session of the legislature in January, but they're not even being given a hearing. So we've decided, if they won't give us a hearing, we'll go create our own hearing. So on June 17th at the church on the Hill, which is right across the street from the State House, we're going to be holding a people's hearing on our two bills. The second bill, I should mention, has to do with just making it more possible for legislators to do, serious policy research, fiscal analysis. Most legislators, as you undoubtedly know, have very small staffs, and they don't really have the ability, to do, in-depth research or think about the fiscal implications of what they're proposing, which is another way that the top leaders kind of control the way things work, is they don't allow the lower level folks to have much capacity to really do serious legislative work. So we're proposing to set up, again, what most legislatures around the country have, which is a nonpartisan professional legislative research and fiscal analysis office that all legislators could go to, if they wanted, the support for the legislative drafting and legislative research that they want to do. So that, and then the stipend reform bill that I was referring to before, are going to be the subject of this people's hearing. And, we invite people to come down and show their support. And, we hope it's going to push the legislature to kind of take this more seriously.
Is there a website if people say, oh, I want to check it out, or I can't make it that day, but how can I, what's the website?
Thank you very much. Yes, we have a website, of course. It's MALEG Reform, MALEG Reform, all one word, .org. And that has all the information about the coalition, about the legislation that we filed, the people's hearing, and also indicates where people can, sign up to follow what we're doing and get behind it.
Well, we'll certainly be spreading the word about that people's hearing. I think it's one of the most important things we can do. And certainly over here on our issue of ending incarceration of women and girls, we believe in that. We've held more town halls, and we have a regular town hall on Zoom, but we've held in person. We've done, research and marched across the state, and anything we can think of to help raise public awareness around the issues that we support. But this is really important. I'll mention some years ago when the current governor was running, and there was former senator running against her. And I remember having a conversation with her, and she says, we need rules reform. We're not going to really change much without rules reform. And I didn't know what she was talking about then. But the more that we became more engaged and asking these kind of questions and wondering, as people who have gone through these processes over and over and over again, what happens after we leave those hearings? Or how does the decision even be made to allow us to have a hearing? So I want to learn more about this from somebody for more than 10 years, almost 15 years, have been going up the hill to try and make change, and just feeling frustrated at the lack of transparency. And so I thank you for the work that you and the coalition is doing. And I think this is really important. And it's a topic that we need to, why we're doing this video, to have it explained to everyday folks what this is and why this is a critical part of creating change in the Commonwealth. So I want to say thank you. I want to give you the last word if there's anything you might want to just say.
Well, first of all, again, thank you for your interest in this, and I share your frustration with the current state of things on Beacon Hill. This is a problem, as I said, that I tried to address from inside. I proposed a number of rules reforms when I was in the legislature, and unfortunately, I came to realize that some of these basic features of how the legislature operates just made it really hard to change from inside. So I think this really is an area where we have to push from the outside. This is going to happen only if people demand it. And everything we can do to get the word out. I think the frustration that you feel is broadly shared by people working on issues all across the spectrum. Now more than ever, when we see our democracy in danger, at the federal level, we gonna have to step up here at the state level, make sure our democracy is working right, and make sure that we can respond to the the really serious threats that all sorts of groups are facing around the state. So this is our chance to put down our stake here in Massachusetts and say, we want to have a functioning democracy right here, and have that spread all over the country.
Yes, and we can, and we will. I want to say again, thank you, Jonathan, for your insight. It's absolutely valuable to have the opportunity to speak to somebody who's had the direct experience of actually being a representative of the people. And I think those are the most important voices in helping us. So coming on to the FreeHer Podcast to help us better understand this so that we can use this as a tool and help to raise awareness by educating people more. We're very grateful for you coming on. Thank you.
You're very welcome. And thank you, Andrea, for having me. And thank you for all you're doing.